Welcome to Primitive Projects. The outdoors has been a valuable resource and place for recreation for all of recorded history. And as time has gone on, the technology used in the outdoors has drastically changed and improved. But sometimes reverting back to more basic methods is not only fun, but can help hone fundamental skills for enjoying the outdoors. So in this series, I'll be bringing you along as I attempt to replicate modern outdoor fun with more primitive techniques.
Hey guys, it's Mission Discover. Welcome back to another video. And in this episode of Primitive Projects, I'm going to show you how to take walnuts like these and turn them into something that you can actually eat. And the only thing that you're actually going to need to do it is a knife. Before we get started with actually harvesting these walnuts, I'm going to give you some super quick extra info on how to find these walnuts in the first place. First of all, these are called black walnuts. They are not the same as your typical grocery store walnuts. They have a much more potent and powerful flavor. These black walnuts are native to the eastern seaboard of the United States, but they've spread westward as well as into Canada and Mexico a little bit. I recommend taking a look at the trees around you when you're on your outdoor adventures throughout the year and finding an area where these trees are so that you can come back in the early fall when these walnuts start to come off the trees. And just as a quick reference, here is what the leaves look like and here is what the actual tree trunk looks like. Once you have your foraging area located and walnut season rolls around, you're simply going to look beneath those walnut trees and they should just be laying on the ground. Here's one. I see another one down here as well. There's one. Here's another one. There's some more. And you're just gonna collect these by hand. There's a whole bunch of them down in here. Now, something of note, although the stereotypical walnuts you'll be finding are gonna be this nice, ripe, green, fruit-looking thing here, they don't all look like that. And only some of those non-green walnuts are actually okay to pick up, and I'm gonna show you which ones they are right now. So the first type you're gonna find is something like this. This is actually what is inside that green outer casing. This is the actual nut part. And if they're laying on the ground like this, just the nut, then that's not one you're gonna pick up. I can't specifically tell you why, but in all my years of collecting these walnuts and harvesting them, I have never picked up one on the ground that doesn't have its shell and it actually had a normal amount of meat inside. Usually they're pretty sparse. However, on occasion you'll also find ones like this. They are black and starting to decay, but they still do have their outer husk. These are a-okay to pick up. They may have some insect larvae in them and they don't look the most appetizing, but as I already mentioned, the nut inside is actually what we're looking for. It still has that outer hard shell around the actual meat, so any sort of contamination or decay on this outer husk actually doesn't matter. So as a quick recap, no husk, you don't want it, but a decaying husk is okay. Once you've collected your nuts, you're gonna bring them plus your knife over to a nice working area. Now, I did say that the only thing you're going to need to do this process is a knife. And while that is true in a super primitive or survival scenario, there are a couple more things that you may want to consider. First of all, when I say knife, I'm talking about something like this. This is a super sturdy fixed blade knife. You're going to want this because we are going to be beating on the knife and we want it to not break as we're doing this process. If you're familiar with batoning, which is a pretty common bushcrafting technique, you essentially use your knife plus a larger baton, which is typically another piece of wood, and you use the baton here to beat your knife down through the wood and split it into smaller pieces like this. There you go, just like that. This same technique is possible with a folding knife, but it's a much harder process and is definitely not the preferred method. If you do want to do it with a folding knife, you're actually going to want to have it only partially opened and beat on just the blade. Because if you use it in the opened position, it can do a lot of damage to the pivot or locking mechanism if your knife has one. Another thing you might want are some gloves. When you take off the outer husk, it has a lot of tannins and other chemicals inside of it. These can really stain your hands. Just as a quick side note, the dyes inside the walnut husk could be used for some other cool bushcraft projects if you want to stain or mark something, but that's not something you want on your hands. It will stay there for a while. Trust me, I know. And also in some scenarios, depending on how your body reacts with the chemicals, it could cause blistering and a decent amount of pain. So I would definitely recommend gloves if you have that luxury. Obviously, if you're just doing this on a whim or you need it for some sort of survival scenario, you got to do what you got to do. But if you have the option, gloves are definitely a good thing to have. Now, let's get down to business here and show you how we actually process this walnut. So first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get this outer husk off. What we're simply going to do is you're going to cut down until you feel the hard shell of the nut inside. And you're going to do that all the way around the outer diameter of the nut. And then you can simply just pry off that half. Then as you can see here, you have a little dome shape. And you're just going to do the same thing. Cut it along the middle of that dome. And then pry it off piece by piece. There you go. Now we have the actual hard nut shell unpackaged here. Next, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to strip some of this stuff off. This is not what you want to be eating. Some people have used this stuff for medicine, but it's super potent. It's not going to kill you if you get a little bit on it, but we definitely don't want to be purposefully ingesting this stuff. The more rotten the nut is, the more liquidy and mushy this stuff is going to be. This is super easy to shave off, and the other stuff you're going to kind of have to just peel off. All right, now we have the basic nut, and now comes that batoning step. So if you look at the walnut, they're kind of oblong in shape. It's more flat on the side facing the camera and my hand, and it's much thinner this way. It definitely wants to sit this way and has a more flat side there. It also has a point at both ends. It's kind of hidden here, but there is one there. You can definitely see that one though. You're going to want to position the nut with the points up and down, parallel with the blade, like so. Here's our point, and our blade would sit like this, and you're going to want to put it against a hard surface with one of those flat sides facing down. Just as a recap, the points are in line with the blade like this, and we have a flat side down. Then simply baton the nut in half. There's our two halves there. Now you're gonna lay it the same way with the points in line with your blade and your new flat spot from splitting it facing down towards your hard surface. And you're gonna split it into quarters now. The reason why we're splitting it into quarters like this is the actual nut meat kind of does a maze and weaves through the inside of this shell. So to be able to actually get out as much as possible with just our knife here, you're going to want to split it into quarters so you can access this maze inside the nut from as many directions as possible. Now comes the easy part. You're going to take the tip of your knife, pry it in there, and just push out as much nut meat as you can. Sometimes it'll come out in big chunks, and sometimes it's just little flakes like this. Either way, they're still edible. You might want to also bring a container to pop these into. Sometimes you might want to even split the nut another time, which I'm going to do here because there's still some down in that hole that I can't get to. There you go. Got that out. And there's the other piece right there. As I mentioned earlier, there are more industrial style and efficient ways to do this. And this more primitive method is pretty monotonous. But just to give you an idea, that is all the meat that I got from just half of one walnut. All right, now that we got our walnut meat out, it's time for the moment of truth. Let's have a taste test. There's our little piece of walnut there. And it tastes pretty good. As I mentioned earlier, these are a little bit more potent than the walnuts you get from the grocery store, and they certainly add a little kick to your recipes or a out on the trail snack. But with all that being said, that is actually all I'm gonna have for you guys in this video here today. Hopefully you enjoyed it and learned something about how to take your outdoor foraging skills to the next level. If you did enjoy it, possibly think about leaving me a like and hitting the subscribe button if you haven't, because I've got more informational and educational content just like this coming real soon. God bless. I'll see you next time.